right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So good morning, everyone. I am Jessie Whittish with Kentucky Youth Advocates, and it's great to see all of you this morning. Before we get started, just a quick reminder that we are recording today's forum to share as both a video and as a podcast. So we ask that you stay muted today. But if you have questions or comments or anything like that, please drop those in the chat, and then our panelists can address those as they respond or respond to them in the chat, or we will follow up with you later after the fact. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Terry Brooks.
Hey, thanks, Jessie. As I think we've done at all, whatever 57 prior forums, we want to welcome everybody, whether you are one of those. I have been to every daggone one of those, or this is your very first time. So we're delighted to have you all. The frame today is really simple. KYA's vision for Kentucky is that we want Kentucky to be the best place in America to be a kid. And we have been very clear that if the color of your skin is a determinant, this can't be the best place in America to be a kid. If your zip code determines access and well-being, this cannot be the best place in America to be a kid. And I would suggest today that if you are a little boy or a little girl with special health needs, unless and until we address those in accessible, affordable, and high quality ways, Kentucky cannot be the best place in America to be young. And let's be very, very clear. This is not some marginal issue. 23% of children in Kentucky from age 0 to 17, I'm going to say that again, 23%, more than 1 in 5 kids, have special health care needs. So it's a big deal. That means that Kentucky is the 6th highest rate in the nation on that particular metric. And it is an issue, if we're being candid, that gets far too sparse attention and far too innovative responses. So I think today's topic is a really important one. You know that what you're going to hear from us is that we want to think about on the ground approaches, but that we also believe that we need to go upstream, that we need to be thinking today, what solutions from Frankfurt and Washington at a policy level can create quality assurance for every child with special health care needs, regardless of which 120 counties you may find yourself in. So I really appreciate our experts joining us today. I think this is a topic that needs a lot more illumination than it's getting. I also believe there are some very pragmatic policy upstream solutions that we all should be about, and I'm anxious to learn from our guest today. And to kick that conversation off is my colleague and friend, Patricia Tennant. So Patricia, take it away.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you for that framing. Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad to see you all here today. And before I get started, I'm really excited about our guests, our panel today. I wanted to start for our regulars to our forums. You might have noticed a pattern. We always like to end our discussion with ways you can act and engage. We'll do that, don't worry. But I would also like to flip today with an ask for you all. Too many times as advocates, we get energized and motivated to solve problems without the leadership of the people who are deeply impacted by those problems. And we're aware that Kentucky has some work to do to better identify and serve young children with special needs. And just to dig in here, we're really talking, today we want to focus on children ages 0 to 5 with special needs. And who knows best? It's their parents. It's the parents of children with special needs. And so we are looking for parents and caregivers of children with special needs who are willing to share their experiences with us and help shape our advocacy effort. There are a variety of ways that they could get involved, depending on their level of interest. It could be ranging from serving on our steering committee to sharing their insights via surveys, interviews, focus groups, those methods. And so if you have any parents or providers, if you happen to be a parent yourself and would be interested in joining this and shaping this, you can connect them to Debbie Abreu. And I think Jessie just put that information into the chat with her email address. So I just wanted to say that up front that we are looking for parents and hope that you can help us to build up that resource for us as we shape our advocacy efforts. So now I'm excited to welcome our panelists. We'll begin with Judith Bradley, who's the founder of Jack Be Nimble. Kristen Williams, she's the executive director of Play Cousins Collective. And Ivy Alexander, who is the executive director of the Office for Children with Special Healthcare Needs that's based at the Cabinet for Health and Family Services. Welcome to the three of you. And I'd like to start our discussion today with just some setting the kind of landscape of what do we mean by special needs, and not just special healthcare needs, but special needs in general. And I'm hoping maybe Ivy, you could help us talk a little bit about why is early identification and early intervention so important for our young kids?
So here at the Office for Children with Special Healthcare Needs, we define a child with special need as someone with chronic physical or developmental or mental or emotional condition, and they need more care than a child would generally. So that's where we start. And of course, early intervention, we just know that the sooner we can intervene with various conditions, that child is going to do much better. So we start at the office, we start right at birth as far as early intervention with the hearing screens to ensure that once that child begins in school, 5 years down or 3 years into their life, that they are going to be successful. Also with First Steps Point of Entries, there's one here in the KIPTA region that is, as well is focused on early intervention and the importance of early intervention. So at the Cabinet for Health and Family Services, we always say we want everyone in Kentucky to reach their fullest potential, including our babies, our infants, our children, and of course our youth.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, digging in a little more, how are we doing? So once the child has, we'll talk a little bit more later on about how, what happens when or how do we screen kids to find them, to identify them. But if a child has been identified as having a special need, I'd love to hear from the three of you. What is the scope of resources available to them, to families with young children? And, what's available and maybe where are the gaps? I know that's a big question, but it's open to any of the three of you.
Good morning, this is Judith, and I'll be happy to address our own experience. I'm the parent of a now 21-year-old, so it's been a long time since we were engaged in early childhood, but he is a person by this is his definition, a person with autism who is disabled. So those of you in this space know that the individual preferences around these words becomes quite important, and Jack is also a self-advocate, and he has some other underlying medical complexities. So, you know, for me, and Jack is the namesake of our organization, but and inspiration on many levels, but as a parent and as a professional now in this space, our experience was, Ivy mentioned first steps. Our experience was that was our doorway, that was our path. I'm so thankful and grateful for that entry. On the flip side, though, I'll say that with our situation, and I hear this a lot from families, because Jack's particular disabilities were not clear, were not obvious until, in fact, he was a little bit older. His trajectory developmentally was definitely slower and different from more typically developing children. But that was a real big challenge, because my motto has definitely become never too early. And I think that one of the things that we need to be looking at is being way more proactive on screenings and those conversations very early. I'll stop there, but I'll be happy to share more later about why I think that is really especially important as a prospective solution.
Well, I think that might be a good segue to Kristen. I know Play Cousins plays a role in those screenings and identification. Could you talk a little bit about what are the tools that you utilize, and what does that look like?
So Play Cousins Collective works with Metro United Way to facilitate the Ages and Stages program. And when I meet a parent, so oftentimes we'll have these things called pop-up play dates, where we go to the park with our children, we're pushing our own strollers, and we'll see somebody else with their kid, and we'll say, hey, you, let me tell you about Ages and Stages. So we're those crazy ladies in the park. Sorry. We always have children with us. And Play Cousins is really for us, by us. And that's really the whole idea behind the way that we operate the Ages and Stages program as well. Ages and Stages is a program, it's really a tool for families to monitor their child's milestones. And so it really puts the power in the hands of the parent as the child's first teacher. So they know what milestones to look for as that child is progressing. And they're the ones who can say, oh, well, no, they aren't doing that yet, you know, and they can ask questions. And then those questionnaires go back to Metro United Way and they're scored. And if anything looks off, Kim at Metro United Way will be giving you a call and say, hey, you know, I saw you had a question about this, or, you know, this is, you know, a little bit concerning. And we just wanted to ask you a few more questions because maybe it's just a fluke and, you know, all the other questions around that area are fine. But in the event that there is a delay or, you know, something that is more concerning, she's right there with you to say, well, here are all the options. Here's a speech therapist, and here let's get you enrolled in HANDS, or let's get you enrolled in Healthy Start. And just having I think that starting with a place of power changes the game a lot. So it's not just peer support, but it is, sorry, I got distracted by the chat there. It's not just peer support, but it's self-initiated. I think it just changes the dynamic of what you're trying to do, you know?
One other Kentucky resource is our Kentucky F2F, our family-to-family health information centers, which are statewide, and parents can reach out to the parent consultants and be connected to another family. So they've got lots of resources, lots of information, and just a wealth of knowledge of where to refer.
Mm-hmm. Great. So that was a question I had, Ivy, in terms of, it sounds like, do we have that similar resources throughout the rest of the state in terms of Ages and Stages? Is that being utilized statewide? Is that a Jefferson County effort?
For ages and stages.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I don't have an answer to that for ages and stages. For first steps, the only piece of first steps that we're using is through here in the KIPTA region. But our F2F is the F2 family to family services are statewide.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. And I wonder, a question I have too is now, thankfully, we are coming out of the pandemic, and I'm wondering how did that impact access to services for our young children with special needs and families? What kind of impacts have you seen?
So at the Office for Children with Special Healthcare Needs, of course, we are a state agency. So at the beginning of the pandemic, state offices were closed to the public. We were still in the office, but the public was closed to the public. So our clinics that we typically have, we have 11 clinics across the state, 11 locations. We had to stop services for just a little while, maybe 3 to 4 weeks, but we have always, probably for the last 7 years or so, used telehealth. And so what we did is revamped and updated and enhanced the telehealth program. Telehealth was before, it was two-way, at our office and then at the physician's office. And because of regulation changes, emergency regs, we were able to make it a 3-way telehealth visit at the individual's home, so the parents and children could stay in their home. And then our care coordinator's location, and then the physician's location. So telehealth skyrocketed, our numbers skyrocketed. So that was one benefit. One thing we found is not everybody has access to telehealth. Mm-hmm. So we're actually starting a lending library through some CARES Act money, some funding. We have little tablets and cards, SIM cards, so folks can get online, that will be loaned out to families that do need telehealth services but don't have the technology to do that. And now we're back. We are back and, on site, but we're going to continue with telehealth services as well.
Great. I guess as I'm learning more about this topic, I know, the first step is screening kids and identifying them. And I'm just wondering, the next step is to connect them to those services. And I would be interested in hearing from you, Judith and Kristen, from your experience. How do we do then? How are we doing on that? Once a child has been identified, on connecting them to the services and making sure then that they're getting what they need.
Again, my experience directly is a little bit old, but I don't know that things have changed so much based on families, with whom I interact. I was given at the time this massive, it seemed, encyclopedia. At that time, it wasn't online; it was physical. Here are all the different therapists that you might call on, and I remember, as a person who is well educated, had really been intentionally seeking to become a mother with a lot of resources, I felt utterly overwhelmed. It was just daunting. And then in our case, we had at one point, Jack had 5 different therapeutic interventions simultaneously. Just scheduling those and trying to figure out also how they interacted with one another. And in my case, attempting to facilitate that they did interact with one another. So I think families still may be experiencing some of that overwhelm, which is, bundled with perhaps being a new mother or a new parent or a new foster parent, caring for an infant in many cases, or very young child, potentially for the first time, or with other children in the family to care for and other responsibilities, work. that again is an area where we could look at, you know, I'm jumping ahead, but I tend to think start with the end in mind. You know, some solutions to facilitating, making that a little bit easier. But our main path came through at the time, our physician referral to First Steps, the assessment, and then meeting with our case manager to identify services needed. But then I kind of felt, okay, now it's yours to go conquer. And that was tough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that there is a huge issue with a lack of holistic care, you know, and not even just care, but community, like holistic community. You know, it can't be, you know, here's the symptom and let me treat this one symptom. Okay, now here's this other thing. Like she said, you know, Judith, when I hear Judith talking, it just makes me think about the way that our current system operates, where it's just, I don't know how to describe it, but it almost like an assembly line. But that doesn't work for community. You know, you have to have like a whole village around people. People have to be connected to each other. And when you have any type of oppression or marginalization, I think that it's an isolating experience because of the society that we live in. You know, so how do you connect people? And I think that there is, you know, there's a huge lack of that type of community. We create spaces where children can play freely, where families know that if there's a behavior that is unsafe, that will intervene in a kind way that's not going to be demonizing the child, you know. But I think that there aren't enough spaces like that where there's, you know, freedom for our children. And I know that definitely impacts the special needs community.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that hits on kind of the next question I had was, it sounds like we kind of have a culture of that really is built around typical needs, right? So how do you prepare a child for a culture that doesn't really think about their needs? And beyond, you know, who are the other important players in that space? So I've heard you talk about the pediatricians play a really important role in helping identify, you know, who are the other players in the system that need to be thinking and mindful about how they can support the families and children with special needs. And I'd be curious, help us expand and think broader. Who are those players in the system that we need to be reaching out to and making them aware of this?
You know, I think we overlook a lot the power as, and I'm sorry, is it Kristen from
Yes.
Play Cousins? Thank you. That Kristen was talking about with respect to community. So we hope, and I think it's true for most families, that there's some family and friend support or interaction. And I often have family members contacting us saying, you know, my grandchild, my friend's daughter, my neighbor's child seems a little off, and I don't know how to talk to the caregiver or the guardian or the parent. And that was, in our case, we were very blessed to have in our family a number of educators who were also able, as Jack grew and developed, to point out some things that, you know, maybe I'm too close to as a mom and am overlooking, or on the flip side, you know, too concerned about. Okay, that really does look like it's in the realm of typicality from people who really now know him. So I think that's an area of opportunity, is the community surrounding that family and actually asking them, who are those folks? Are there daycare providers in your life? Are there play groups? Are there other friends? And we tend to have this culture around also secrecy. And this is kind of a deeper dive into what it means to advocate, and especially when it comes to self-advocacy and disclosure, but especially when it comes to children with a wide range of needs that may be atypical. We rightfully need to respect the privacy laws and the FERPA laws, but we also forget that the families themselves can initiate disclosing helpful information. And I think that we can do a lot more asking directly. Who are you looking to now for support? Who might you consider? Let's have those people also engaged in looking at not necessarily screening, but especially, honestly, those grandparents who've raised lots of babies, they know. I didn't have that in my life here in Louisville, but whenever we saw my husband's family, all educators in Michigan, it was such a rich experience and so beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
One of our upcoming projects that will impact providers across the state. It's called Project Echo, and it's an Echo for Autism. We have a panel of specialists and educators and a parent that's on this panel, and then pediatricians, providers from across the state can participate. So it's specifically for physicians, to learn more, in this case, about autism. So if they're in an area of the state and they're the one physician in the area, and if a family comes in and they don't know what to do, and instead of just saying, okay, I'm going to refer you to Weisskopf, I'm going to refer you here or there, this program, the Echo Autism program, is made to empower them so they can do more within their community and assist those families, right where they live. So.
Thank you for that. I think that I know, Ivy, you had referred to some CARES Act funding and how that's going to be utilized by your office. I'm kind of curious. I know, Judith, I know you're very active in this space, and I'm not sure, Kristen, how much you have been, but in terms of the relief funds that are coming to states and localities, cities, counties, are there any that you are paying attention to that can help, serve children with special needs, and ways that we should be working together to uplift those?
No, I don't know about funding, but from this conversation, it has me thinking about the fact that, I don't know how many play groups there are for children with special needs, but, play groups have been something that's huge for us. We need so badly play groups, and we could do that in our office, once a week or something like that. But I think that especially for people of color, it's really scary to think about your child being special needs, because there's already so much that, we're trying to navigate. Trying to find resources and spaces where we'll be looked at in the best light. So I can understand like that secrecy and the defensiveness that, we've, with Ages and Stages, it's like, that's what I love so much about it, because it kind of puts that power back in the parents' hands. Because I don't know how to, it's just like, it's frightening. And it's, how sometimes if you have to rip off a Band-Aid, it's easier if you're the one who's ripping it off versus somebody else's, but there has to be a culture shift. And we have these things called parent cafes. We need to have a parent cafe about this, because there are families that are in our circle, who have children with special needs. And it's wonderful that they're able to participate in our programming, but also they should have their program, like we should create programming for them, that centers them as well. With Play Cousins, we're always talking about centering the most vulnerable, because if you're able to do that, then everybody else in your community is able to be comfortable and, you know, stronger and is able to get through the door if you make the door big enough for, you know, or small, you know what I mean? Like everybody's able to have access if you provide for the most vulnerable person. So this is just setting off all kinds of bells in my mind.
Oh, Kristen, I love your is it a metaphor or an analogy? I always get those confused, but of ripping off the Band-Aid, that's so true. During my pregnancy and my son's early childhood, I had to learn to give myself injections. And I thought, there's just no way, I am not that person. And then eventually we taught him to give himself his own. And it's just a world of difference. So that's a pretty good metaphor. But I wanted to talk about a specific initiative that we're getting ready to roll out and would encourage everyone to participate in. Really hits the nail on the head with this. It's not so much about identifying, but that opportunity to build community. And that is to really, we've just completed a study of looking at, we think we got most of them, but the inclusive, accessible playgrounds in the state. There are not enough, of course. We think that maybe some of this art money could be put to good use. And there's a really wonderful organization we're looking to bring to Kentucky and partner with on actually doing some educating around inclusive play, because it also gets at this issue of having those conversations. And frankly, the kids don't care. They go directly to each other. It's more us adults sometimes that need to have some conversation around the bias that we kind of pick up as we go. I also wanted to comment on, in addition to communities of color, there are some communities that culturally this is kind of a taboo. So there's an opportunity to reach out to folks within different cultures and coming from different perspectives to ask them how best to approach their communities. And I don't want to speak for anyone on that. Those are some tangible things. We JCPS, in a meeting a couple of weeks ago, Ms. Chevalier, who's the ECE chief at JCPS, talked briefly about an effort to look at having more accessible activity buses, or buses, period. I think that Joe Bargioni is on this call. He probably knows something about that, but unfortunately, she didn't say why, but it looked like that was going to be a challenge. Well, I'm going to be asking the question, why? Why is that a challenge? And in early childhood, especially when we know that being in a diverse, language-rich, culturally rich, and experientially rich environment is so essential. That's something I think we should be talking about too. How do we create those opportunities for us and respite? I forgot to put in respite. I could talk for an hour about that, but I won't. But we need to be looking to create some opportunities for respite for these parents who, in our case, when we really began to learn the extent of my son's needs, I was already pregnant and expecting our second child, and in another very complicated and challenging pregnancy with very limited family to support, but the benefit of our privilege and resources. My concern, though, is in spite of that, we had a hard time, and I don't know how people who don't have all those assets are doing it. They're who I'm concerned about.
And when you bring up that gap, that one of the things that we like to expand upon is the care coordination. So for our medical clinics that we have here, where families actually come to our site, they all have a care coordinator, a nurse care coordinator. And we're looking to expand that to those that may not be part of our clinics, but still need that assistance, that care, that coordination. So that is a gap that we've recognized.
I feel like we need it would be really helpful for me if parents were able to receive training on, how to provide respite for other parents. Because we do a lot of, finding somebody who has a similar schedule, and then that's your person, and you guys switch kids every now and then. I wouldn't be able to do anything if I didn't have, a couple sisters like that. But, that type of training would be really beneficial for us.
And Kristen, what do you think about not just training, but having an app that connects people?
Honestly, when I wrote down babysitting bank, if I can come in here 5 hours a week and then next week I have 5 hours of childcare, that would blow my mind. You know what I mean?
Exactly, and pay it forward. And also, I'd like you to have some time when you don't have to, quote, pay it back, right?
Yeah,
that's what I'd like for you.
Mm-hmm. I love the synergy happening here, clearly, and the innovative ideas that are already being dreamed up right now. I did want to, there was a question in the chat from Keitha that I'm not sure if you all can answer, but I did want to raise it. I think it's a good one. And she says, as a child care center owner, I would love to do ages and stages, but cost is an issue. Can any of you reflect on, are there avenues that she would be able to access that as a child care center owner?
Where is she at? Are they, if they're in Louisville, then they could participate with Metro United Way. I'm almost certain, because there's daycares that do that already.
Pulaski. I'm in Pulaski County.
I can email Metro United Way and see.
Okay. We'll help look into that, but I do think that is an interesting thinking statewide, because I think, Metro United Way is going to focus on Jefferson and surrounding counties. But maybe that is something that we need to be paying attention to statewide to make sure, making it easier for all child care center owners.
But this is also, Patricia, another opportunity for an ask related to the ARP funding. And I think that one of the things that we want to see with these programs is measuring their impact, so that then we can make a case for sustaining them, because really they're low cost programming, actually, to just facilitate a play group coming together. And I'll look and see if there, I don't know, you may know, is there an accessible playground in your community? If not, let's work on that. I mean, that's just a really wonderful place to start. And although parents and guardians shouldn't be the first line, in my opinion, of going to necessarily for first, information, that's where we do go. I mean, I'm not suggesting that they should be engaged formally in assessing and evaluating children for their needs, but that's where we go. I go to my friends. Hey, you have a young adult who's just entering college. Tell me what I need to know. What am I missing?
Great, excellent. Yeah, I really appreciate that. So then, just thinking now, as we think forward to, I think we've talked about, what's available, some of the gaps, and what's the role that policy can play. Are there changes that we need to see happening in Frankfurt that could help support and uplift the good work that Kristen is doing at Play Cousins, here in Louisville? What are some of those policy changes? And that could be going back to the investments of the CARES funding, but also, in the broader picture, what are some of those policy changes that we need to be mindful of?
I was kind of waiting for someone else, but so my focus has been very much on special education and not as much, frankly, as on early childhood. And I'm not I'm not as familiar with the regulatory framework and policies around that, but I think in general, and this again has been the role that we've been playing, for better or for worse. I hope it's for better. There has to be a consciousness of asking the question with respect to every single policy, frankly, to begin by asking, how is this going to impact our children and their caregivers with disabilities? I mean, to me, it's just a bottom line place to begin. And that, I'm pleased to say, I think is happening more, and we are moving the needle forward more, but it should be baked into every legislative conversation about policy, every educational policy, every board member, every school board discussion. And I think that just raising the question brings tremendous awareness. So there are a number of specific policies that I feel need to be examined, especially again with respect to K through 12. And I'd be happy to look at some of the others and ask some other colleagues to do that. But that's my number one thing, is always ask. Let's start with being the person in the room who asks the question, how is this decision we're about to make or that we've just made going to impact this group of people, their educators, their service providers, and their resource folks, as well as the child, him or herself, and their family. So I don't know, that's not very specific, but I really do believe it's the single most important thing we can and should be doing.
I think that we need to look at the support for parents in the workforce. I know that there's new, legislation in the works from Biden that's supposed to increase the support for childcare, for daycare, I suppose. So I think, I think that's really important, that we have support, but not only support, but we need people who are trained, and we need, people that are going to be loving to our children, and really build them up and be asset-based, especially with the special needs community. We have a whole lesson around special needs for our youth. I'm going to go home and Google inclusive play, because that's what we talk about, being inclusive all the time. How can you call that person in, or how do you, we don't call out your differences. You're looking for, oh, hey, we have the same shoes, or I like that too, but how can we make that child care support inclusive, I think would be important.
I'm sure. I hope that I'm not stepping on your toes here, but Kristen, you just said something about training, which is, and I appreciate that. That is a missing piece in other domains outside of education. So I have a friend right now going through a very difficult medical situation with a marginally verbal autistic child, and in the medical care has been made far more complicated by the inability of the caregivers in the hospital and rehabilitation setting to communicate and understand how to communicate. This is actually a teenager with this child, so that it has required both parents in this case to be in the facility 24 hours a day. And then they learned that their Michelle P. waiver wouldn't cover that time, because it's not in their home. So we do have policy issues embedded in that. Again, I don't know enough about those specifics, but we're missing training tertiary providers as well as the daycare providers and the caregivers in those early years, who should really be, I'm going to go out on a limb, they need to be educators, really. We need to value what they do much more than we do. and have them be creating these environments to maximize the opportunities and potential for this young child, so that when they do become school age, they can engage more fully and in a more inclusive classroom as they're able and as it's appropriate for them.
Amen. I think, I'm very active in terms of advocating for more public investment, and KYA is in childcare. And that includes recognizing the importance of our early childhood educators. And that includes meaning we need to compensate them, not only with, wages, sustainable wages, but, benefits, the whole everything. And you've just given me another reason why we know the importance of the early years, but especially for our children with special needs, of having that trained educators who have that commitment and passion for young children, and that they need to be able to stay in the field and make it a career. And so thank you for giving me one more reason why we need to do that. So now, as a wrap-up question, I'd like you kind of to turn it to, everyone who's joined us here today. And now's your chance to put out a call to action for them. What would you like everyone here listening today? What some action steps that you would like them to take? What can they do starting today?
For me, I think that there's a shift of culture that try to make wherever, I guess, you're working and in your own home and life, like trying to shift the culture from trying to streamline and organize your life and everybody in your life and around you to fit inside this box. I think that all of us are just really trained to do that, and so many times it's not even it's a framework that doesn't even fit us. So we are ourselves trying to fit inside this box, and doing that to our children, and to the children who we work with, and to the parents that we work with, and saying, this is the way that we're supposed to operate, and you're less valuable if you can't operate like this. And you're a liability for me as well if you can't operate like this. Being able to say, you have to be able just to mess up everything needs to be a mess. If you're doing community work, or you're doing work that, is compassionate, right? It's not going to be this highly organized, and, so we have to figure out how to gain the knowledge to connect and to make things messy again.
I don't know what I can add to that, Kristen. I think that's just totally on the mark. To infuse everything we're doing with this question, I will repeat. There are some very specific things that you can check back with us in probably about a week. We're also very much of a baby organization, still evolving and growing and kind of reimagining who we are. Our slogan has been Reimagine Special Ed. I would go out on a limb. My educational and disability cohort peers from locally, regionally, and the country don't like when I say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Ultimately, my vision is that there is no such thing as special education, that we have education, and it is, every child deserves an IEP, and frankly, I think it needs to start at birth. I think that the action steps really need to be around engaging families in an authentic way, with compassion, valuing what they have to contribute, not only to their own child, future student, but to those around them. And, really right now, I would love for everyone to be going to their local school boards and asking them, how are you engaging with the community to gather ideas, which is a requirement of the ESSER funds, and what are your plans right now, and how will we know that you're using the money in the way that we want? So accountability, transparency, and the way to do that is to just ask. It really does boil down to, you know, a lot of you all, I think, are service providers. Let's ask how this money is going to be used, and I think submitting ideas, whether you're asked or not, to be proactive, suggesting a program that you have or could further develop or expand that you know would provide these things. Now's the time to really be proactive and ahead of the curve and not wait. The districts are supposed to have their plans to KDE, I believe, by the 31st of July. I don't know what the requirements are for providers of 0 to 5. That's something we should find out.
I just want to piggyback on what Judith was mentioning. I know it's regarding the schools and the school board, but just in general, I know advocates do this all the time, parents do it all the time, but just there's so many surveys and needs assessments that come out, but they're just responding to them is very important. We use that information for the needs assessments and the surveys, and that's how we actually got to that lending library, you know, to the point of the lending library. Based on surveys from families that couldn't participate in telehealth, you know. So I feel like I get surveys all the time, but just it's so important to respond to them because, you know, things can be implemented based on responses.
Thank you. Thank you so much to the three of you. I know I've learned a ton today, and thanks for, I think, modeling for all of us the kind of curiosity and innovative ideas that you bring to the table, and just your advocacy for our young children. So Jessie Widdish, I'm going to turn it over to you to close us out.
Great. Hey, everyone. So thank you to everyone who added some insight in the chat and had some questions in the chat. I have your email addresses and we'll follow up with you on some of those. And as Patricia mentioned, we're also looking for parents and caregivers to be you know, involved in this in different ways, whatever meets you, and I'll send that info out in the follow-up email as well. So if I can just put my mom hat on for a second, not that I ever get to really take it off, but just like speak from my mom's heart today. I really appreciate all of you panelists being here, and Kristen, I've learned that it's okay that it's all supposed to be a mess, and that I should really say hi to the crazy ladies in the park with the strollers, that those are the folks to run to. But as a mom who had a kid or who had a baby who really had some significant gross motor delays, and I remember that moment just watching him in a classroom, and he moved up to the toddler room and all his friends are doing their little toddler thing. They're running around and he couldn't, like, he wasn't mobile. And I remember just sitting there and being like, oh my gosh, like what's happening? And I am Ivy, I'm in the Kipter region and forever grateful to the First Steps crew who came in and helped. But that it just happened to be something that came up in a doctor's visit. And if not for that, there wasn't another parent who was like, huh, or a child care provider who was like, huh, you know, it just happened to come up in that. And so what you all are saying around that kind of community awareness and community understanding of sort of what some of those developmental needs are, and then, you know, what to do, and you know, you feel like such a bad parent or you feel really isolated. And so what you all are saying really resonated. And it's, you know, something we continue to watch. He's just now 5. So it's, you know, I'm kind of at the end of sort of this age range that we've been talking about. But, you know, it took a long time to catch up. So just really appreciated all of your insight and your points for everyone on this forum and beyond around how we can support, families with kids who are learning differently or moving differently, or have different healthcare needs. So thank you all. I'd also like to extend a thank you to Aetna Better Health of Kentucky for their support of today's Advocate Virtual Forum and our virtual forums that we have every week. So next week, we will be discussing the 2021 National Kids Count data book. And that book includes state level data for Kentucky, kind of comparing us with states across the country, and also includes some new pulse survey data about how families are faring in the face of the pandemic. So that book is being released on Monday, and our forum on Wednesday will include a presentation of that data along with some reflections from some key folks. So as always, the follow-up email is going to include a recording, and then we will have the link to sign up for next week, and resources shared today, and information about how to get in touch if you want to be a parent or caregiver advocate. So thank you again for joining us, and we hope that you have a great rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you next week.